This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Yeah, I've never been to Cairo, and I'm not a very good driver. I wouldn't last 5 minutes in Cairo, so I don't really, I'm very pleased to be here and to, I've just got a very prosaic kind of question. How did you do it? How did you meet all those people? How do you get invited into their cars and develop such a kind of relaxed, intimate rapport with people? I mean, you're obviously great at the entree and getting into different scenes and making this kind of picaresque movie that just moves very fast across a vast space. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to just say that I had come from making 2 films in Cairo. One was I was a cinematographer and it was about garbage, and the other one was this activist film. So I was already very conditioned that this is going to be difficult, and I think that's part of the reason I chose driving as a subject matter, because I think in general in the Middle East, especially now in Egypt, people are very hesitant to be filmed. So I thought that driving was a really smart, I mean, I can only say this now. At the time, I didn't think it was very smart. But now I can say it was very smart to say, they would say, I don't want to be filmed. And I'd say, I don't want to talk about anything but traffic. Let's talk about what's happening right here. But I won't talk about politics. Please don't. Let's just stick to what's, knowing that if there was a rapport, they would obviously get into deeper subjects. But I think it was nice to have this very confrontational subject matter. Let's talk about driving, which every Egyptian or Cairean, it is all of our story. And everyone knows it, and the second you say, oh, let's talk about driving, then it was like, and then I would say that a lot of it, I mean, obviously what you're seeing is what made it to the film. There were a lot of people that were not so receptive. But in general, it was literally, and because I'm a one-man band, I would sit in a coffee shop often, have a couple cigarettes and coffees, and just sort of think, okay, what do I want to film today? And then I would just try, and I would get into cars, and obviously the camera is hidden away, and it always started with this sort of, let's develop a rapport, and I'll decide whether or not I'm going to tell them, hey, I'm working on this film. But it wasn't like, hey, can I film you, ever. And then there's a few characters that I knew. I mean, I have to be honest, the girl is my cousin.
Which girl?
Which girl?
Well, that girl, single and fabulous.
Oh, yeah.
And she said to me, she said, before she saw the film, she said, did you talk about my UN AIDS work? And then I said to her, she said, well, I hope you didn't typecast me. And I said, Karina, I mean, the first day of filming, you wore a purple tight shirt that said single and fabulous. And then you proceeded to hit your driver. So I don't know if I typecasted you as much as, fine, this works. Yeah.
So the filming wasn't surreptitious at all, or it was?
In the sense that...
Sorry, I mean, they knew that, it was...
Everyone knew they were being filmed.
Right.
They certainly had no idea. I mean, for example, the military general, which was very hard to get. He was the head of traffic at the time, and I just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I just kept asking everyone. But he said, I just want to see the tape that you filmed of me, and then I'll sign off on it. Which I thought, oh, great. He doesn't need to see what context it's in. So we, talked to him for 3 hours and recorded everything and gave him the tapes, and he watched it, thought he looked pretty good, and done, yeah.
But the shooting ratio must have been amazing. I mean, there must have been tons.
I had 250 hours. I had storylines. I had characters that at some point we just had to decide what is the bare minimum. And even now, I sometimes question oh, shouldn't we have? But it's done. I mean, And thank God I'm done with it, because again, having just come back from Cairo and seeing where driving's moved to now, and everyone loves to say, you should film this, Sherief, and it's like, I'm done, we did it, we filmed it, we're done.
Yeah, I read some reviews, and somebody came up with this great word, I think, for describing it, chaotic.
Yeah.
You know, that there's an order in the chaos.
Through the chaos.
And that seems to be the allegory of the whole thing,
Yes.
that everything looks a complete mess, and yet
it
people
flows.
know how to navigate it.
Right.
And I think it's amazing that you made this composition that seems so loose and improvisatory, and yet is so ultra tight.
Yeah.
And that must be the editing.
Cheers, I'll drink to that.
And then, you know, so I thought about the city symphony films from the 1920s, Ziga Vertov and Ivans and so on. But you know, their films are silent, so you could easily impose this structure. But you've got sound. Everybody's jamming, really. It's a musical film.
Yeah.
You know, the cars are playing music. People are all their spritzing and their rap is completely musical. So and it sounds like jazz. And then I thought about the relationship between jazz and traffic in the city. In this culture, and you've done something here that is like jazz, only it's for the Egyptian scene. And you begin with Handel, but then you soon get into something else. So you know, this is more of a sort of just a tribute to what you've done. Could you talk a little bit about music and then move from that to thinking about editing and how you went about doing it?
The music was always going to be, I knew, an integral part of the film, and I'm very musical, and I like to cut to music that already exists, whereas a lot of people, you know, bring in an orchestra, but I thought, no, I want to take... so we started with Handel, and it was because it was water music, and there was something about him sort of conducting a symphony. It's later been pointed out to me that that was also like regime music of its kind, and I thought, oh, perfect. Yeah, I meant that. But, and then to bring it back was, you know, at the beginning in the order, and then to bring it back during the revolution was important. And the rest of the music was, a lot of it was, I made the mistake of my first film of using any song I wanted. I'm going to use the Ramones, I'm going to put this in, I'll get the rights later. And I quickly learned that that's, which is maybe one of the main reasons my first film about smoking wasn't really seen much, because I had no rights to any of the music. So with this film, I was very conscious about who do I know that's a musician? Let me listen to what they have. Let me make sure I can use the music before I even put it into a sequence and start playing around with it. Because you know how, as an editor, you kind of get locked to things. And I thought, I don't want that to happen. But I knew that the whole thing, I mean, it was all, I think a lot of the editing, and we go to editing, was about finding that balance. I knew I wanted it to be very loud, but at the same point, I knew that an audience would cry. And it's, you know, I'm in a car, so audio shooting is all very shaky. So I knew that we had to get out of a car and just sort of have those calmer moments. And I didn't know what they were, but I sort of found them, like the ambulance drivers sitting around. And it's only like, as you're sitting there, you're thinking, oh, right, this is perfect. This is kind of what I needed. But this film took me 5 years. I had been editing the entire time, showing people cuts and not showing people cuts, and it wasn't until I finally, a friend of mine convinced me, you need to just raise money on Indiegogo, which is what I did, hire the editor that I had worked with on a previous film, mainly because I knew that our rapport was good and he was someone I liked arguing with. He slept in my apartment. I had another friend from Cairo who saw the trailer, also said, I'm coming, I'm helping. So it was the three of us, for 2 or 3 weeks, we just ripped the thing apart and put it back together. And you know, I'm honored that you say it seems very loose, but yet you can tell it's very tight. But yeah, every single edit, and I did the translating myself. It's very hard to translate humor, and it doesn't always translate. And it was like, literally like, would a comma make this funnier? Or is it not funny at all? So the editing was, we spent a lot of time on making it as tight as possible, including everything we wanted to, and not giving the audience too much time to think about anything, and to just keep it moving. And that was sort of our goal, like, keep it moving. Just keep going. And then the ending was just, you know.
Fortuitous. That was a gift.
Yeah, you know, I've heard, in showing this film, I've heard a lot of different comments, and I'm very much looking forward to opening it up. But one of the comments was, and how did you make that accident happen? I didn't make that, yeah, like, what, I'll drop the man now? Yeah, like, you know, to that I said, well, yeah, and that revolution, that was also because I needed the film to take an arc, so I said, guys, let's throw a revolution. But, you know, I think you just, by default, so much footage. I was lucky a lot of times. There were a lot of things I missed. And at some point, you just sit back with all of the footage you have and you say, okay, how can we tell this story? With certain ideas in mind. One was, I want the film as populated as the city. I don't want an audience to necessarily care who this person is beyond this moment that we're in. And I didn't want it to get into, like, you know, and people wanted that. I worked with Danes briefly, and they were like, give us some backstory. Let us see them at home. And I just thought, that's not this film. Yeah, you know. Yeah, and I will say, I mean, again, driving, I think what was really nice about it, and one of the reasons I thought this is the film I want to make, is because driving is one of the few things in Cairo, maybe in many cities, but that just cuts through all social classes, all, you know, sex, religion, it doesn't matter. We're all at the same light. We're all equally frustrated. We're all, and again, that's why it's sort of everyone's story. And there's few stories in Egypt that are everyone's story, but traffic is that. It doesn't matter if you have a car or can't afford a car, or if you're in public transportation, or it sort of equalizes the playing field.
So I'll ask you, leads up to my question. This film was made over 5 years, and it was released in November 2013?
Yes.
Along with a lot of other films about Egypt, specifically about the Arab Spring. So now, 3 years later, I feel like this film still has traction, while maybe some of the other ones, while some of the other films sort of had their moment and are gone. They're not as interesting. We're not looking at some other films. What do you think is unique about Cairo Drive that has given it some breadth, and some longevity beyond the scope of when all eyes were on Egypt, right? Because all eyes are no longer, if eyes are on Egypt, they're not the same eyes, or they're not looking at Egypt for the same reasons.
Well, I would say initially I was maybe a little later than those that got to the film first, you know, to the revolution. And initially it was, you know, I would apply to festivals and people would say, oh, this isn't another revolution film. And I'd have to say, no, it's not. I just sort of drove around the revolution. But I think the best compliment I got was my cousin early on in the process said, Sherief, it's kind of like you made a revolution movie without trying to make a revolution movie. Nice. And I thought, oh, thank God. Not that I tried that at all, but I think, again, going back to the editing, we were very conscious of not wanting to be too far on one side or the other. There was a period where there was such optimism that it was easy to get swept into that, and then there was such pessimism and it was easy to get swept into that. And when the political thing happened, of course, I shot and suddenly it turned into a political movie. But, you know, it was like a good friend of mine who kept saying to me, stick to your theme of driving. Stick to your theme of driving and let that sort of cast a light on bigger subjects. And that's it. I think because I had this very sort of, this subject that's just sort of there, driving, and a lot of people thought, how are you going to make a film about driving? Like, no one wants to watch an hour and a half of that. But to me, it was all the other moments, which was really the film I wanted to make. You know, the ambulance driver, for example, talking about how he couldn't get married. That's not his story. That's half the population's story. and and so in Egypt, when this plays for an audience, it's almost like they know the characters without even hearing them speak. And it's like, of course, right. And there's that guy, and here's this young girl, and here's that, and...
So how is it received in Egypt or in other places? I mean, could you give us an example how maybe it's, how do Egyptians there or Egyptians here, or maybe Europeans or people in Hong Kong, how has this film been received internationally in different places?
Hong Kong, they were very quiet. No, I'm a funny thing about Egypt is that Egypt, suddenly people were interested in it once it got some acclaim outside of Egypt, which is fair enough. But Egyptians have actually really loved the film. And a lot of people have said to me, you kind of made the film that everyone's wanted to make, but you just did it. And it's like, whew. But it played at a local cinema in downtown, and it was supposed to play for 1 week, and it ended up playing there for 7 weeks, 4 or 5 screenings a day, which I thought, that's too much. You shouldn't screen the film that many times. But they had audiences, and so, I mean, again, I'm very proud, and I can only say this now, that it is very much, and for Egyptians, it's a completely different film, because obviously the language makes it a lot easier to get certain nuances, and like I said, they know this. So for a lot of people, they have really enjoyed it. Outside of Egypt, it's been really nice to hear things like, we didn't know Egyptians had a sense of humor, or we've never seen the Middle East covered in such a way, and again, that makes me very proud that we did do that. And then you have people, they're often Egyptians who don't live in Egypt and haven't been there for a while, that are, for example, I showed it in a park in LA, an Egyptian woman, she was way over there, I could see her approaching me, I thought, she doesn't like this film. And her first comment was, how dare you call yourself Egyptian? You showed our country, you made it look awful at the worst time in our history, and how dare you show this to... So that's something that I'm constantly feeling like I need to justify, even though I don't, but yeah, I don't know. There is this idea in Egypt that you shouldn't air our dirty laundry, and you certainly shouldn't do it to the foreign world.
Definitely, you have to empty the streets when Obama comes.
Well, exactly, you have to clean it up, and you have to just, but I just thought, I knew that this, because I had tried so hard in Egypt initially to get this finished, and that was a no-go, so I knew that I wanted it to have both audiences, but I somehow thought that my path was going to be to find an audience outside of Cairo, and then Cairo will be interested in it, which is what happened. And that was good. And also, I will say, going back to the editing, I knew that I wanted this film to sort of reach, Egyptians, it's great, but they live this every day. They don't need. So that was one of the choices of having characters speak in English or in Arabic. I didn't want the whole thing to be subtitled, and I like this sort of flipping back and forth, and that's kind of how this cosmopolitan world the city that I know and love works, and I thought, well, this is important to show that. And so, now people are like, well, why do so many characters speak English? Or why this, or why that? But I would say, in general, it's been really well received, and yeah. Did I answer the question, or did I just talk a lot? Okay.
Of course, in America, we got the Road movie, which is such an iconic kind of...
Right.
The American road,
Yes.
the open road.
Yes.
This is the closed road.
Right, yes.
Or the road to nowhere, because in a sense it goes round the ring road. And,
The circle of
and
it
you know,
all.
you go out, you've got this ideal, the ideal of perfection of the partner you want, and it ends up being the girl who lives next door. You know.
Right.
That's the kind of perfect allegory for what you're talking about.
Right.
You know. So I was thinking about the road now. The road here is, such a fetishized kind of thing, the open road, the metaphor for open horizons and, space.
Yes.
And yet, of course, the road in this country is the most regulated space on earth.
Right.
You do one thing wrong and you're going to be pulled over, and, even if you haven't done anything wrong, you're likely to end up in jail if you're black driving in the South or something. Okay.
Right.
So, you know, that's interesting because when you think about this inversion of freedom, because freedom is the word that when Mubarak says freedom, suddenly you move into the revolution.
Right.
But now I'm thinking about why, you know, how the car and the car interior features in the Middle East, in Iran, you know, Kurostami and, you know, the film 10 and this new film, Taxi Tehran. I've forgotten the name of the director.
Right.
Obviously, the Iranian situation is very different. You've got the same kind of tension with the police and regulation and so forth. But could you just sort of talk a little bit about how, you know, the connections between...
well, again, like I said, I think driving, what was nice was that it crosses all. And then as well, in Egypt, you know, I was telling you earlier, the producer early on in the process said, you can't make this film. We tried to make it in LA and it didn't work. And I thought, but LA is totally different. LA is all about living in a bubble. But in Cairo, there is no bubble. And I just wanted that. I mean, everyone is interacting. Everyone is passing things, you know, and there's stuff that I wished I could have captured. The tea that's passed from one taxi driver to the next. Hey, I just made a cup of hot tea, you know. But it is so communal that, that I wanted that. And I will say, I mean, back to your open road, the reason I focused on Cairo is because the road is not, I mean, it is, that's the capital, and people said, you need statistics of how many people die on the road, and. But again, most fatalities, and there are plenty, were one of the highest.
12,000 a year.
But a lot of that happens outside of Cairo, which is on desert roads going from A to B. And within Cairo, although there are plenty of accidents, and certainly people die all the time, but it's more sort of these fender benders. I mean, there's just not enough space to get enough speed to really, you know, unless it's the middle of the night. But there was just something that appealed to me so much about the community of, for me, it's also living in New York, coming back to Cairo, and also I'd say coming back to New York. It's that first cab ride from the airport home that is kind of the litmus test where you know exactly what's happening in the country even though you've been away for 3 months. And you know, it's like, what's the weather like? Okay, what's happening here? And I did the same thing a week ago when I got to New York. It was like, how's the weather? What about Trump? What about the, you know, you just sort of, but I liked, and at the time I thought, I knew that things were getting tense, or I would say that I kept feeling like it's getting harder and harder to find this sort of love of life. And I knew that, I thought initially when I started in 2008 or 9, I thought I'm going to sort of document a bit of a breaking point, not knowing that it'll actually, you know, having no idea that it would have exploded into the Arab Spring. But to me, it was always like, it's just the easiest way to tap into certainly a city as urban as Cairo is through the people that spend all their days on the road, because it's sort of the opposite of being in a bubble. And it's very hard to be in a bubble in Cairo. I mean, as you can tell, noise, sound, everything is sort of, but in a car it's even more, it's sort of more obvious, at least to me, that like it's just sort of we're all in this together and we're literally reaching into each other's cars and having conversations. You know, you can be driving and, you know, someone will just get involved with your conversation. He's in another car. And you could be talking to a cabbie about anything. And that happened to me a lot while shooting. You know, people who didn't even know what I was doing would just see me filming in a car and just start yelling at me. What you're doing is wrong. You don't know what I'm effing doing. Like, what are you talking about? Keep driving. So, yeah, I'm glad that Taxi movie came out after this film came out, because when I heard it, I was, you know, heard it on NPR and I thought, ugh. And initially people said there's so many driving films out there, you should watch them. But I'm the kind of guy, and because I was this sort of one-man band for so long, I thought, I don't want to see anything because it'll just depress me. And I'll think, oh, I wish my film was that. So let me just finish my film, and then I'd love to see all the driving films that are out there.
It's got this particular, you know, Egyptian, it seems an Egyptian sense of humor about the joke which hurts.
Yeah, that's...
You know, because the whole thing is like that, you know. And I think that's, you know, the fact that we moved from taxi drivers to ambulance drivers,
Yes, yes.
you know, really indicates something, you know, so anyway.
Well, I will also say that there was a point, and these are Egyptian friends, that said, you know what, Sherief, this film should all be a comedy. And God knows I had the footage to really get much more ridiculous. But my answer was always, anyone that lives in Cairo or knows people that live in Cairo, we've all lost people on the road. So it's funny up until a point, and then it's not funny anymore. And so I think it's doing it an injustice by making it just a comedy. Because yes, it is funny, and Egyptians are very funny, and this is sort of a survival mechanism. In order to deal with, we've sort of developed this very sharp sense of humor, which is funny. I mean, Egyptians are funny.
To do with resignation too.
Right,
I mean, that's the,
right.
That's the thing.
Just a coping, this is how we deal.
Yeah.
But for me, and that was, you know, the foreigner, when the guy that lost his daughter, that's the point for me that the film, and we, you know, placed it there strategically, but at some point the tone has to change. And you know, I could keep filming kids and laughing, which was the only moment that, you know, those kids that were singing the song, that was the only moment that while filming I just thought, oh my God, this is gold. Unbelievable.
The kids.
Like, yeah, like red, 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 red. And they had done it so that when we walked in with our camera, they were singing as we walked in, and I just thought, oh my God. Of course, the filmmaker in me was like, no, I need to film this. Luckily, they sang the song 5 or 6 times, so I could get different angles, and I could film the lady, you know, on the piano.
Yeah.
And
So, thanks, Sherief, for a fantastic Q&A.
thank you guys. Thank you.